Bantustan territory called Kangwani, now falling under Mpumalanga province. She works at the Foundation for the Human Rights, has managed for vulnerable groups. Please, can you clap for her?
Sanbonani,
Yebo.
Dumelang, Moleshani, Jerejef, Kamaku, Thokozani.
Thokoza.
Ngibingelela abahlali. Bakhona abahlali. Ngibingelela ama-civil society organizations. Ngibingelela abaphathi be-university. Ngibingelela i-host organization uMtapo. Lezinye ikhulu oyitatangiswa ezikhona la. Sisi has introduced me, indicating that I work for, in vulnerable groups. All those titles are also imposed because we are not vulnerable, and that's why my first acknowledgement was the presence of one of the most forgotten groups in our society, which are people living in informal settlement. The sister has just mentioned that I work for the Foundation for Human Rights. We just finished the largest baseline survey where we were looking at the attitudes, knowledge and skills around the Constitution. And we found that 65% of the people living in informal settlements have less hope about this democracy. While the knowledge of awareness and the knowledge of awareness and understanding had increased by only 4%, that is from 47% in 2011, when we did a small survey of about 4,000. This time we sampled about 24,000 across the country working with States SA, and the knowledge had increased only by 4%. As to whether it's impactful, it's another issue which I think the previous speaker was detailed about. So, I will just speak to three key important issues which are the topic of the day. My request to present was on restoring a culture of rights. And I've just, put a versus scenario of individualism, corruption, and violence. So I'll speak about that briefly and then talk to a case study that has been conducted by the Foundation for Human Rights, which we recently presented at the national hearings on xenophobia at the South African Human Rights Commission, which is the one you can see on the PowerPoint. And then lastly talk about, in brief, the Peace Eco Village movement as an alternative to the continuing violence that I personally and others continue to experience at many levels. I consider corruption and individualism as a marriage. It's the same marriage between capitalism and racism, as the professor mentioned. And the child of this couple becomes violence. A child born out of corruption and individualism becomes violence. It's named violence. In South Africa, and many other African countries where there's the great wealth surrounding us. The army and the police constitute the pillars of the regime. Now, just starting by quoting Fanon. And this army and the police are being advised by experts who happen to be Americans, Europeans, or right-wing or have a right-wing personality. And the strength of the police force and the power of the army are proportionate to the stagnation in which the rest of the nations sink. So we're sinking by yearly loans that are made on behalf of us. Concessions are therefore snatched by these countries or representatives from these countries. Scandals are numerous. Ministers grow rich. Their wives become dolls. Their wives doll themselves up. The members of parliament feather their nest, and there's no soul down to the policeman or any other individual or the custom officer. That's just by quoting Fanon in his understanding of how corruption has worked and entrenched high levels of our leadership and in general our society. Then this child that is born out of there, it becomes perpetual violence, and it's countries who appear at peace, who negotiate on behalf of us, who places us in these disadvantaged conditions. They are quiet and they appear to be normally at peace, but don't talk about their indirect role in the countries which are in armed conflicts. So for us, when we do this work, a theoretical framework that uses Freire reminds us that as human rights educators, we have sides that we take. We not only take sides, but we also live in those communities so that we don't talk of them, but we talk of us. And therefore, being organic intellectuals in real sense, not in theory. Of course, there are casualties, I must warn. We are aware that Amilcar Cabral, Thomas Sankara, Samora Machel, Steve Biko were some of those that are counted in these casualties that are then manifesting in assassinations, killings, and so forth. Delving deeper, Africa is a multi-layered wounded society in general. In 1997, just before Hurricane Mitch in the Southern America, a range of development workers asked themselves a question on why so many workshops, so many dialogues had been hosted, but people were not changing. And in that analysis, they found that the level of violence that people have experienced is not dealt with at a root cause. It's bandaged, and therefore creates a cycle of violence that is intergenerational, layered, and cyclical. And in fact, we are born in an inherent DNA of violence. We see it at many levels. The conditions that have been painted here earlier of sewage running in the street, of young learners at the age of 6 dying in pit latrines, it's violence. Violence is beyond physical. Violence is emotional, is psychological, is economical. She talked about how we are being oiled just as a machine to serve a system that we eventually become consumers and not prosumers. We don't produce, we only consume. I must thank the university. The water here, I see it's just produced here locally. I was in a conference recently. The water just we drank, wrapped nicely in this container. It was produced in Italy.
Yo.
So what an opposite way in which we understand development in South Africa post 1994. So it's easy to fall in each other's arms as often possible. And many groups fall apart of this too much sweetness without healing the deeper wounds. That's according to Dieter Doom, one of the eco-villagers in countries which we work with. An example is Reconciliation Day in South Africa, which is aimed at healing past wounds. And none of these the generations of the perpetrators of human rights violations of the past come close to these events. Some of them are Dutch descendants from today, what is called the Neutral Hague, where the International Criminal Court sits. So what happens during Reconciliation Day? Millions of South Africans will swim. I will not mention, you'll analyze yourself who they'll swim the malls and go to the beaches. They don't have anything or will not even know what Reconciliation Days mean, in South Africa. So multi-layered wounded societies run a risk of these intergenerational traumas that we see manifesting in today's society. So it's important that we historically analyze the root causes of our challenges today, so as we can be enablers and animators for the change that we want to see. Quite often we are told that there are no best example of peace in Africa. Africans are violent, and so on and so on. We have good examples that we have. For example, in Egypt, the 12th dynasty is presented by historians as a peaceful, reorganized society with a sound administrative policy that guaranteed peace in the country, prevented recurrence of famine, and made possible impressive building operations, medicine, libraries, reading, writing is core to Africans. And quite often the narrative is that when somebody has left, or the status quo as it is when it's challenged, there will be no development because Africans knew no development before slavery or colonization. One of the, in my view, the best book that has come of late in the South African space is by Lorenzo Fioramonti, who analyzed the level of inequality, poverty, and unemployment in South Africa, which are all imposed, and summarized it in a well-being economy book. In one of his articles, he talks about quality of life in this South Africa we live in, which is unenviably the most unequal society in the world. He says that here the rich need to protect themselves behind bars, walls, and electric wires. They live in constant fear. They are continually stressed as they fear armed attacks, theft, and fraud. And quite often I don't believe that our people steal. Our people go to collect what they are being owed. If your mother wakes up at 3 to ensure that somebody's child is bathed at 6 and is taken to school, and your mother comes back at 10 in the evening not knowing whether you have washed in the morning, you have done homework, and was a carer for somebody who really doesn't care about the well-being of the child that looks after his or her child, then I don't believe our people conduct fraud. Or, I mean, because majority are young people maybe, living in informal settlements, rural areas, unemployed, so-called, don't have skills. I don't believe they are thieves. They just go and collect. That's what they told me, the ex-convicts whom I work with in Soweto, they told me, Sarah, we go and collect what is owed to us. That's their view. Of course I don't question, who am I? They know their situations and they understand it better. Though I'm a peaceful person, I always find ways. I always find ways to be empathetic to the teller of the story. So now, with this wealth that they create and amass amongst themselves, they are continually stressed. They need to purchase all sorts of security services which wealthy people wealthy people in more equal countries don't need. If rich South Africans don't die of stress-related conditions, they die because of sedentary lifestyles and poor diet. Confined to their cars, malls and gated communities, many of them, they don't get enough physical activity as a result. Those who want to work out spend more money for personal trainers or in air-conditioned gyms, and of course they have all the language to protect themselves. Economists call it adaptive preference. They will say we enjoy, but they've preferred to live this style, this way of life, as an adaptive way of dealing with the situation they are faced with. Now, at the foundation, when the xenophobia violence started in 2015, resurfaced, in fact, it's called xenophobia. There were a range of activities that we engaged in, because one of the fundamentals of our constitution is the promotion of the values of Ubuntu, human dignity in particular, which is the right to life, of which now we have to fight, not even fight, we die to access those rights. The professor spoke about it. So the foundation was set up in 1996, just for a background, through an agreement that was signed by the late state president Nelson Mandela with the European Union. Seeing that we have the constitution, then we need people to know what the constitution says. So it's in partnership with the Department of Justice, is an agent that facilitates that relationship to promote constitutional rights awareness and education. So we do that through supporting civil society organizations through a grant-making process that is, fairly transparent, and it gets a thorough, nationwide publicity in terms of the application. So the model we promote is called Panel, where we allow projects that hopes to engage. I don't know whether still participation exists in South Africa because there's no one to listen, as the professor said. Then accountability, which is clear does not exist. And then non-discrimination, which is questionable. Then empowerment subject to the rule of law. So in the meetings we had for over 3 years, every once a month or twice a month in other areas, we found these issues that I've mentioned. And last year, with the incidences in Rosettenville and Mamelodi, you know well about them, we found that the problem was largely corruption between state agencies and private property agents. That was massive, and targeting vulnerable people like the elderly people who were about to finish off their bonds. Their house were being hijacked. There was a huge scam between the deeds office, the property agents, some of the migrants communities involved, some of the councillors involved, ganging up against an individual who has paid their bond for years and claiming they can cook these papers. They cooked these papers, they took all the logos and presented the letter as if it's an official letter to a vulnerable person. Either is an elderly to us to finish the bond, or is a woman, or maybe is somebody who came through this migrant labor system from Mozambique and then now has settled, is now in his advanced age or had advanced age. They will be a target. They will be evicted, and then this scam will buy the house and then refurbish it and rent it out for exorbitant amounts, including the banks were colluding massively. I've mentioned the activities that we got involved in to just get the communities to speak between each other. In some of the meetings, we had to take insurance. It was very, very, very difficult to mitigate, because how can you tell somebody whose house has been taken and knows exactly that the councillor, maybe a Nigerian, is involved and they have evidence of this information? So it was really a major challenge. We had to involve high levels officials from the subs intelligence units. The guy you see on the right-hand side is Brigadier Linda, who was a national director at SAPS, working with the intelligence, and he was able to break through some of the networks that were operating there and help us to facilitate the challenges. So also working with faith-based organizations assisted a lot, from the different spiritual or religious groupings to talk to the issues, as one of the conflicts were being brought by the fact that communities were complaining about so many churches being opened next to each other, and therefore just looking like a scam where a pastor has a church, then also runs a drug den, and there's a prostitution house also going in the same premises owned by the same pastor. So we had to engage, and it really worked very well when we brought all the denominations together. We also worked with the Department of National Basic Education to roll out a national, they call it social cohesion, series of engagements with young people, especially learners in schools, to talk about xenophobia. Also, this issue came from the situation here where the king, I respect Amakosi Amesangoma too, the king had uttered a statement that migrants are causing our cities to be dirty and hanging amaniginigi on the streets. So we also came in this province, worked with the provincial department, and this is what we found out. Besides the curriculum which we developed through a popular education rights booklet that uses case studies and the current legislations around protecting migrants and refugees, we also worked with the University of Johannesburg, the Center for Education Rights and Transformation, to produce a curriculum which at that time the National Minister of DBE, Angie Motshekga, had said it will be incorporated or infused within the school curriculum. But up to today, though this work was commissioned by them, they never considered taking this work further, of which our evaluation moving forward with the learners 3 years later, we called them and tried to find out how far this work has taken them. Most of them, where it reached them, it has had a positive impact, and somehow we can say the change in attitudes amongst communities the change, like the minimal 0.5%, it's not much that has happened across the country in terms of attitude, is accounted to this kind of work in part. So the general concern from learners was that they were not aware of the Constitution, especially the most important value of Ubuntu. This term human dignity is transferred basically to mean Ubuntu, to being hospitable, something that we are now reminded through this Constitution we used to have. And it was broken down through this violence, this lack of trust that the system has brought between ourselves. We no more trust each other. We rather trust what we Google or we Facebook as authentic than the face-to-face interaction and the neighborliness that we used to have before. So broadly, learners had a knowledge on what rights are, especially in health, education, safety, and shelter, but they didn't necessarily link those to the Constitution. And some didn't understand what xenophobia means. They thought it was some sickness or some disease. And very interestingly, most learners said to us, they've learned about negative attitudes or stereotyping another fellow African from parents. So parents, in my view, they are poisonous to the kids. Kids or children are born with a view of seeing a human being. Normally they don't see any color, any difference, but we put the poison like we're pouring gas in a petrol, though it's not green fuel at the moment, but we pour it, it's poisonous, and then it reproduces itself in how the learners see each other. When we ask if they see migration as a threat or as a permanent feature of our society, they said, yeah, it's permanent. South Africa send often their students to Cuba to study medicine. So it's a permanent feature. So they told us something we're not expecting. With the media, so this program, I must say, it was designed with an understanding that the media also contributes negatively, not also. By far and large, I've just mentioned social media as one aspect. How many of you watch television? Television, eh? Which programs do you watch? Can somebody share? Not that I'm putting you on the spotlight, but in my view is that somebody telling you their vision. So the issue of being prosumers, produce our own content, memory, and then view it ourselves, then we will be pro-viewers. So we'll be producing and viewing, so it's a provisioning what we want to see and the society we want. Not Hollywood, Schwarzenegger, because I grew up not knowing anything about African characters. I knew Schwarzenegger, the missing in action guy, and Stallone, the one who just passed away. That's what I knew. That's why I can name them. But ask me to name any best actor, I only know Make. Who else? My memory then starts. But tell me about Western content, I can give it quite easily. And I can't wait for 5:30. I don't know whether it's still 5:30 for The Bold and the Beautiful. That was those days, where you'll know the rich script from morning until you can even, dream about it. So here the idea was that let us as the foundation produce the content, work with communities. So in this regard, we talked to this program called The Big Debate, normally facilitated by Sikim Kabateli or Masechaba. And then we funded about 12 series of The Big Debate, and one of those was around xenophobia. But also here we funded organizations like Africa Unite. They are here in this province, and the Center for Civil Society, we still have issues to discuss. I think they might be here, which is UKZN. But I'm just making examples to then take this information to their communities in a way that they understand and see them, not in the way that I might see them or somebody sees them. So one of these organizations produced a song which became a rap song, because young people, I have kids, they like popular culture, and part of this culture they like is hip hop music. So they hip and hop. So the rap song was produced by, I don't see him here, and it was played on community radio stations, and it became a hit, and he was invited to come perform at the anti-xenophobia series of the Big Debate. We also did some journalist conference, and we've been working with the Institute for Advanced Journalism to promote this content. I don't know whether we can play this song. This is the song. Where's the IT person? I'm an antique, a digital native can come and play here so that we can have just a little bit of what went into this song. Oh. Okay, so we were supposed to play the song, and the summary of the findings in this work was that there's lack of documentation across all identities. If I'm saying individual identities, I call all human beings living in South Africa. Either you were born in South Africa or outside of South Africa. The systematic exclusion, unfriendly attitudes, local communities selling, that was what now, this is all from the interaction with communities, that local communities are selling RDP houses to migrants, causing tensions. Lack of access to education, in particular quality education. Lack of access to healthcare. Language is a barrier, huge barrier. And one of the approaches we use here at the FHR is a multilingual approach, ensuring that the language is spoken by the communities is the one used, hence directly working with communities or civil society in the area. So recommendations and way forward is what we call organic holistic intergenerational conversations with action, not just talking and not act upon your personal actions or personal words. Though there is advocacy directed to other people, but the commitment also should be within yourself. There's what is called local economic development units in municipalities. We don't know how they work, but we saw them in paper because we are very good in paper. It's because we consult with, as I said in my opening intro, people to write up our own policies. The implementers are left to you and me, and we don't know how they function. So the LED offices are there, but nobody seems to know. But I think their mandate, when I read on paper, is to engage youth on what is called integrated development plans, with this vision of having an active citizenry, which everybody has made a buzzword coming from the National Development Plan. We should engage youth using the LEDs, but none of, who has heard of the LED? It should be in your municipality. There's none of the young people here, but on paper there's a structure to facilitate youth unemployment. Is very clear, youth unemployment and skills. And I'm sure it's gonna lapse that policy without anything on it. So part of our work is to talk about this, and then I can't say inject, but encourage each other to use these policies to our advantage. I'll tell you what to do if it doesn't work.